For the past 30 years, humanists within and outside the academic study of literature have been ringing the alarms against theory. And for good reason. Literary theory had been on the rise since the 1970s and enjoyed a long period of dominance in the 90s and early 2000s. And this was a time of psychoanalysis, postcolonialism, feminist theory, deconstruction, new historicism, Marxist critique, eco-criticism, and a plethora of cultural studies. English departments began to look less like literature departments and more like departments of theory and ideology. Literary study based on the principles of criticism and close reading, founded on a genuine love of literature, was pushed out by a new reign of theoretical orthodoxy, characterized by skepticism, intolerance sometimes, political ideology, and a preference for academic jargon instead of plain speaking. Love of literature was considered naive. Many graduate students who entered the academy with a love for literature left their programs disenchanted. Those who made it through their programs with their love for literature still intact and who still refused to play the game often endured their studies in exile and left them without job prospects. Since we are about to study theory for the first time in a mini course on Versed in September, taught by Dr. Robin Landreth, I want to talk about what happened with theory, where it went wrong in the academy, and how theory can still be useful for self-learners and students today. First, let's talk about what theory is and what it is not. Literary theory is essentially any method of reflection upon literature. Think of theory as the framework that is either philosophical, it can be psychological, cultural, or political, but it's the overarching framework. Most often, theory is concerned with questions about literature rather than about a specific work of literature. Questions like, what is the nature of meaning? How do social structures influence literature? How is a work of literature a social document? These questions, among others, are the kinds of questions that theorists often ask. And they are good questions. Theory is different from criticism in that theory formulates the frameworks for interpreting literature, while criticism applies those principles to analyze or evaluate a work of literature. For example, a Marxist theorist might read Herman Melville's Moby Dick as an allegory of capitalist exploitation. Ahab is the emblem of industry and profit. And he's driving toward profit, and there's that moment where he nails the coin up on the mast. And he's a symbol of that, okay? And also of a domination of nature, as we see his pursuit for the whale. So that's a Marxist critique. A formalist critic would look at the elements of language, of description, and narrative structure. The formalist may read the book as a network of symbols and show how meaning emerges from language rather than from context. One is more valuable from a sociological standpoint, and the other is more valuable from a literary one. But they both are valuable, they both have good things to say, and they both have interesting things to say. The other thing to note about theory is that it's not something that was invented in the 20th century. Aristotle's theory of catharsis functions as literary theory, because it offers a general principle about the purpose or effect of tragedy. It's not really a comment upon a single play or an analysis of work, but it is a way to measure how successful a tragedy is, not by its literary or formal properties alone, but primarily whether or not it produced catharsis in its viewers. So theory is not new. It's neither new nor bad in itself. It has been around for a very long time and has been useful. Literature is the written record of human life and experience. And that's pretty broad. That means that anything that touches upon human life and experience can enter into discourse with it. However, in recent years, the rise of theory has corrupted the academic study of literature in American universities especially by introducing an overbalance of theory and ideology into a study of literature at the exclusion of more critical, emotional, and innocent encounters with literature, including close reading practices. Theory became a gulf between readers and the works of literature, and this is where the problem emerges. This is the danger. As Mark Edmondson wrote in his book, The Heart of the Humanities, he said, if you set theory between readers and literature, if you make theory a prerequisite to discussing a piece of writing, you effectively deny the student a chance to encounter the first level of literary density, the level he's ready to negotiate. Theory is used then to banish aspiring writers from literary experience that by rights belongs to them. Making theory the all-in-all was the danger. This is partly the effect of what Bloom called the school of resentment. Writing in 1994, Bloom complained that our educational institutions are thronged by resenters who suggest that a poem cannot be read as a poem because it is primarily a social document. And this is the key danger with political theory especially, that if promoted too highly and at the exclusion of other great practices, it threatens to eclipse the true encounter with literature. Bloom wasn't against theory. He himself was a good theorist, and in some respects more of a theorist than a critic, at least in his early career. He's against the lack of diversity in English literature departments in America because at that time they were predominantly theoretical. This, I think, is one of the main reasons why I remained skeptical toward theory in my graduate studies, and I looked for English departments that valued diversity of both traditional and theoretical developments. The English department at Harvard has a long tradition of literary pluralism. They refuse to espouse a single ideology, although several of their faculty members have developed new theoretical approaches. There have always been theorists and critics and close readers at Harvard. Helen Vendler was doing some of her best work at Harvard during the height of theory. And as far as English departments go, it's both innovative and traditional in many respects. And the openness of literary inquiry has been better for it. What you don't want is a homogeneous culture, a place inhabited only by formalists, for example. I found that my conversations with Marxist theorists and new historians and other theorists have challenged and furthered my own critical methods as a formalist. And what you need is a conversation in diversity, not subscription to orthodoxy. And that's where the theorist and the critic can and should learn from each other's methods. Now, things have changed since the reign of theory in the university. Things are changing now. What Bloom railed against in the 90s is no longer entirely applicable. Changes were introduced by movements like New Formalism and especially post-critique around 2014-2015, which has pushed back on the over-specialized and abstract practices of theory by trying to validate other ways of engaging with works of literature, including emotionally. And this return to balance is finally being restored, I think, a decade or two too late, however, as English departments are now preoccupied on several administrative fronts. They're no longer really pushing theory like the way they used to. And we have much to be thankful for, thanks to theorists. For example, the work of feminist theorists has brought to light several excellent women poets who were overlooked for centuries, such as Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Charlotte Smith, who, by the way, brought back the sonnet form at the end of the 18th century after 100 years of basically no sonnets in English literature. They brought back H.D., Hilda Doolittle, whose modernist poetry was often overshadowed by her male contemporaries. The work of structuralists helped us better understand the relationship between linguistics and poetics. And the Frankfurt School taught us how literature shapes and is shaped by a society's culture and reflects its values. All these are really interesting things. So there is value to literature, and that's one of the reasons why we are offering a theory course on Versed as a way to model the balanced and practical approach to theory. In September, Dr. Robin Landreth, who's our visiting professor for the fall 2025, she's a scholar of interpretation who teaches theology and literature at Loyola, Maryland. She will teach a course on criticism and theory in tandem with the 20th century lyric poem. So in this case, learning theory will show you how it actually shaped the development of the lyric poem as we know it today. There was this reflexive influence between the writing of poetry and the theory of poetry, the lyric and theory, and you can see them speaking to each other in their different forms of discourse. It's fascinating, and it really happens in the 20th century. You'll learn about the new critics, structuralism, post-structuralism, the Frankfurt School, and feminist theory. A good theory course will give you a toolbox for interpretation. It will provide ways of understanding your own encounters with literature, and it's going to inform your own readings of the lyric poetry of the 20th century. So I hope you'll join us. I hope you enjoyed this essay. Thanks for watching, and until next time.